The Flag Fen archaeological park sits less than half a mile away from the Fengate industrial area on the outskirts of Peterborough in what used to be Fenland. Under a layer of peat is the Bronze Age landscape, excavated in the 1980s by Francis Pryor. Interpretation of the site includes a museum of artefacts found during the excavation and a climate-controlled hall with part of the Bronze Age site exposed for public view. In 2022, following a change in management, the site underwent a series of repairs and renovation. Interpretation on the site has got a construct of a Bronze Age house built in the 1980s and previously had had a construct of an Iron Age house no longer in existence. The Bronze Age house, however, survives, and this has had many repairs done over the decades. I was approached by the site to lead and assist with the construct of a new Iron Age house, having personally built a number of houses at Butser Ancient Farm using very tight archaeological evidence. This map shows how close Fengate is to Flag Fen, approximately half a mile or around 1 kilometre. When the Catswater extension to the Fengate industrial area was undertaken, archaeological excavations in advance of the building exposed a large settlement of Iron Age houses. The excavation showed very few post holes, and particularly not for the walls of the houses. Instead, in the excavation there were shallow trenches marked out where the walls of the house should have been. The trenches were in short straight lengths of around 2 metres, stretching around into a circle for each house. I recognised the form of the house from previous research when I was constructing a house from the Danebury Hill Fort at Butser. After discussions with Francis Pryor, we agreed to build a house entitled Structure 54, as it had some interesting features, including a burial in the surrounding ditch. Iron Age houses were mostly around 7 to 8 metres in diameter, so having established that the shallow trenches made a rough circle, working with 2 metre lengths around the circumference, it was easy and simple to lay up a house of the right size. Construction starts with marking out the circle of the house and the width of the door. The orientation of the doorway in over 95% of roundhouses in the UK is in the southeast quadrant, and Structure 54 faces more or less directly east, so using a compass we mark out the position of the doorposts, ensuring a width of 1.2 metres as per the excavation report. Whilst the doorposts for the door are being dug, around half a metre deep, work starts on splitting the first oak post into quarters to construct the door frame. Mortises are cut into the lintel and tenons on top of the uprights, and the door frame is then assembled on the ground to ensure a fit. The door frame is then lifted up in one piece and the posts are dropped into the holes and packed to ensure stability. Work then starts on the sill plate. This is a ring of split oak logs placed face down on the ground. The complete set are prepared and cut to fit, then a shallow trench is dug out and the oak slabs laid in. By setting them into the trench, they cannot be pushed out of shape as the house is built. The insight at Butser with the Danebury house gave me the way forward with Structure 54. The Danebury house excavations have stake holes for the walls very close together in the chalk rather than posts. The ground under Structure 54 was sand and gravel and would have not have given stakes any support. However, with the stakes drilled into the sill plate, it produces a stable wall. The first hole in the sill was demonstrated with hand tools, but the modern advantage is power tools, so holes for the rest of the stakes could be drilled into the oak. The bottom of the stakes were then slightly pointed, then hammered into the sill and became self-supporting. The stakes for Structure 54 are hazel and willow. The spacing between the stakes is dependent on the thickness of the material that is to be woven into the wall to enable to give maximum strength. Once the full circle of stakes were complete, the top of the stakes was supported by lashing a hazel rod around them. Having got the wall stakes stable, the next process is to weave the wall. This process is known as Watling, and for this house, rods of hazel and willow were used. As you weave, care must be taken to overlap the individual rods all the way around the wall and to keep adjusting the height to level the weaving out. The end product is like weaving a giant basket, so as you approach the top, extra twists of the rods around each other produce a thicker rim on the wall, and in basket terms, wailing. This adds strength and a better surface to mount the rafters on. The wall height is important and has been pushed up to around 2 meters. In early experiments, the wall height was not sufficient to produce a decent living space inside the house. No one in the world makes houses too small to stand in, and it also ensures the roof space is well above head height. Starting the roof. The first task is to raise the first 3 rafters into a tripod. 2 rafters are laid inside the house with the 3rd rafter out through the door. The tips of the 3 rafters are lashed together in a way to allow flexibility of movement. This is a demonstration of the method used for lashing the rafters. The rafters inside the house are then separated. From the outside of the house, the 3rd rafter is pushed towards the house, and at the same time the lashed section is lifted off the floor. This action will raise all 3 rafters into the air, producing a tripod standing within the house. The 3 legs of the tripod are then spread out equally against the inside wall. A notch is cut on the inner surface of each rafter, then one at a time the butt of the rafter is slid up the wall, with care and not letting go, over the top of the wall, and slid down until the notch engages with the top of the wall. Using a square lash, the rafter is fastened to the top of the wall. This is repeated with the other 2 rafters, resulting in a tripod on top of the wall with each leg spread out equally. A further 3 rafters are erected individually, spaced halfway between the legs of the tripod, notched and lashed to the top of the wall, and the tips of the rafters resting in the top of the tripod. These 6 rafters are classed as the primaries, and will be the only rafters to reach the top of the roof. A ring of hazel is constructed and lashed inside the 6 primaries. The 3 loose rafters are also lashed into the top of the tripod. Please note the use of a ladder for this job. The Iron Age folks had ladders, and there is a find from the Glastonbury Lake village of one that is 11 feet long. The rest of the rafters are mounted on the house, notched and lashed to the wall and lashed to the support ring. Spacing is no more than 1 metre apart on the wall, whilst avoiding the centre of the doorway for head clearance when entering the house. The reason for this is to avoid crowding at the point of the roof. These rafters are classed as secondary rafters. Before we move on to the purlins, this is the thatching material, Norfolk reed. This shot is to give you some idea of how long the harvested reed thatch is. It can be twice the length of straw. So, back to the purlins. Starting at the lowest point of the roof, purlins of hazel are lashed to the outside of the rafters in horizontal bands. These will become the support for the thatch. The purlins must be thick enough to support the weight of a person standing on them between the rafters. Working from the bottom of the rafter, a small notch is cut and the purlin located into it, before tying it in place with a square lash. As the rings of purlins progress up the roof, they become a ladder, enabling the roof to be climbed on. Care must be taken to ensure each ring is also horizontal. This is a long job and has to be undertaken safely. There is some modification to the positioning of the purlins to account for the curve over the door. Now for the process of thatching. The first bundles of reeds are laid onto the purlins with an overhang at the lower edge, which keeps the weather off the purlins and the rafters. Each bundle is tied onto the purlins, and the next bundle sits tight to the next to the previous one, ensuring a continuous surface. The method of tying the thatch onto the roof is one that has been used at Butts Ancient Farm for the last 50 years, and has proved very successful and long-lasting. Care is taken over the doorway to follow the curves of the purlins, ensuring easy head clearance on entering through the door. There are 2 layers of thatch around the base of the roof, tied to two separate purlins, giving extra strength and protection, with the overhang allowing the rain to drip well away from the wall. As the thatch continues up the roof, each layer is stepped up around 1/2 metre. Communities all over the world use this method, and there are depictions on Roman carvings of the same. A modern roof has a single slope, and this idea is very new. The doorway shows the second layer merging into the first layer to create the eyebrow over the door. The thatch is being prepared into smaller bundles called yalms. Some storage is visible inside the house. These are much easier to handle. A second layer of thatch is being set, and this is the start of the second ring, stepped up from the first. As each ring of the thatch is put onto the roof, it is tidied and trimmed. The stepping between each ring can be seen, and by working on several at a time, the ladder can reach them simultaneously without having to move the ladder too many times. Almost there, with just the gap to fill. You can see clearly how the rings are stepped up in 1/2 metres, and during rainfall the rain runs from layer to layer all the way down to the bottom where it drips off. The final stage of the build is plastering the wall with daub. Whatever you have in local materials for a wattle and daub wall, the principle is pretty much the same. The ingredients may include soil, clay, animal dung, straw, hay and water. The traditional method of mixing is to put all the ingredients in a hole in the ground and tread in it, but using a bin, a bucket or a wheelbarrow works as well, although you may have to use your hands to mix the ingredients. Application to the wall is by hand, and it's best thrown or pushed into the wattle. It ensures that it penetrates between the rods, and using your hand as you daub, you can smooth and flatten the surface to a high standard. It is best practice to start on the inside of the house, as it will speed up the drying process, and once the inside is done, work can begin on the outside. It can be difficult to work the outside, in particular the top of the wall, as the roof gets in the way. Decorating the house. The Romans write, "The Britons live in brightly coloured houses," so structure 54 from the Catswater excavation, being Iron Age, cries out for decoration. We have evidence in excavations from Iron Age England for painted buildings. The best two known are Danebury Hill Fort in Hampshire and Baldock in Herefordshire. We have used a clay wash for the white base colour, and the inside of the house gets a plain white to begin with. This brightens the interior and gives it a much better living space. After a base coat of white, the outside is given a more eye-catching design by adding yellow and red oxides to the wash. Iron oxides are also known as ochre. Powdered ochre would have been traded great distances with ease. A kilogram of red is no bigger than a bag of sugar and makes a lot of paint. These paints will stand a considerable amount of weather and will last for years. The build was coming to an end, and there was a capping out ceremony organised. The cap had been constructed on the ground and was to be placed on the peak of the house to finish the thatch and protect the roof. The traditional way is to carry it up on a ladder, but in abeyance of modern health and safety, we used a telehandler. All that was left was the official opening, and Francis Pryor was asked to do the deed.
One step. And one final thing to say, now it is actually open. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to about 4 volunteers who have worked ceaselessly and tirelessly on this building. Doing the thatch, doing the daubing, they have been incredible. And it's entirely really due to them and to David Freeman that this building is standing here now. So, big vote of thanks. Where are our volunteers? Put your hands up. There's one. There's the other one. And there. Well done. Congratulations.
Many thanks to the management of Flag Fen for the opportunity to create this house, and for the volunteers who worked so hard and learned so much.